Welcome back. This is the lecture for Chapter 5. It is going to cover evaluating art. And under that, we're going to talk about how do we tell whether a work of art is good, what makes it great, some theories of art criticism, how to evaluate an artwork, the idea of censorship in art, and then lastly, how do we understand when an artwork is finished? So moving into how do we tell whether a work of art is good, I want you to look at these two images. Which one catches your attention first? And what about it is catching your attention? Is it the boldness of the image on the left, the cropped face, or is the portrait of the artist, its self-portrait, is that what's catching your eye? I am going to guess, after years of doing this little exercise, that many of you are drawn to the artwork titled Shy Glance. I think most of you enjoy it, because it is of bolder color palette, there's a mystery to it, the cropping is very contemporary, and it leaves a lot to the imagination as to why are her cheeks this pink and the forehead's got a little raspberry, what has put her into this state. And she's looking directly at you, the viewer, right, in a more intense manner. The portrait on the right of Le Brun is very what we would consider traditional today. It's soft colors, it's composed in a manner that we expect portraiture to be. There's nothing really exciting about it. She is looking at you directly, but her facial expression is very soft and approachable. She is, or was, the Pallas portrait painter for, oh my word. She was the Pallas portrait painter for Marie Antoinette. And when the French Revolution happened, she fled, and continued to live a good while. But what we have here are two different styles. The one of Shy Glance is very contemporary for us today. In 1782, Elizabeth's portraiture, self-portraiture, very contemporary of that time. High fashion, in terms of color and style. She made good money as the portrait painter for Marie Antoinette. So we're going back to that idea of artwork in context of the society and time period in which it was made. And so these are both actually correct for, and I use the word correct loosely, they are very representative of the time in which they are made, very contemporary for their time periods. However, the one from 1782 feels less contemporary. It feels passé almost. So what I would like to tell you about this is, get into the idea of evaluation. Shy Glance was actually recovered from a trash bin. And while it is sweet, it does lack skill. There is a roughness to the handling of the brushwork and being able to see what appears to be some of the canvas and whatnot. However, compared to Le Brun's piece, we see a mastery of skill, of anatomy, color, all of these things. So what we're talking here is we've just made a value judgment about both of these as to which we feel we like best, right? And I want you to be aware that value judgments are inherently subjective, meaning I may have one opinion about it and the person next to you has another opinion about it, and neither shall they overlap, if you will, probably for a number of reasons. Even if you do both agree that you like the artwork. They are not objective. Value judgments are not quantitative. You can't add 2 + 2 and get 4 in a value judgment because it doesn't work that way. When we are talking about value judgments, we are making evaluations, right? And what is an evaluation? Well, it is selecting one thing over another, whether it's appreciating the specialness of something, taking into account the creative process, the quality of the work, all of that is part of our value judgment, whether or not we are aware that that is part of our value judgment. And to get into the word quality, that's a pretty loaded question in art. What makes something high quality, right? So what we think about quality when we think about art, we're talking about the connectedness to other values that we hold, about the function of art in society, making it relevant between people and cultures due to our other deeply held beliefs. So what it's essentially saying is that when we are thinking quality, we are bringing to it our experience, our beliefs in all realms, and what we think art's role in society is. So all these things kind of combined help us come to an evaluative idea about the work. We're making, in essence, a fairly snap judgment, but at the same time, you can take that snap judgment and break it down and think about each element of that more in detail to help you formulate a broader theory or a better idea, a more informed idea. So what we find in an artwork depends on what we are looking for. So are we looking for things we like, or are we looking for things we dislike? So personal value judgments come into play, our own personality, our own taste, our own aesthetic, if you remember that word again. And we should really, when we're looking at artwork, we should really go beyond that snap judgment and keep an open mind and practice seeing versus looking. If you remember that from chapter 1, the difference between looking and seeing. So really delve into the artwork, talk about its composition, its color, the content you think it is, how the content and the form are working together. All those things come into play when you are making an evaluation of an artwork. And in that, we are also thinking about what makes art great. Just because it's expensive doesn't mean it is good. Just because it's cheap doesn't mean it's bad. So the term masterpiece is thrown around a lot in art, but it's really reserved for artworks that have some degree of innovation, important contextual meanings, maybe a recognizable personal statement, maybe a breakthrough in technique or material or composition. All of these things lend themselves to the idea of possibly being a masterpiece. So cash value does not correlate to importance or quality. As I said, it can be really expensive and be a bad artwork, bad painting, bad sculpture, terribly crafted, technique is horrible, all of that. or it can be relatively inexpensive and be exquisite. So, there's this whole idea of an art market. Maybe y'all are aware of last fall, I believe it was, um, there was an auction of Banksy's artwork, and they paid quite a bit of money for it, and then it self-destructed. It started shredding. Um, so, just because a group of people believe it's worth a whole lot of money, um, will vary, right? Is that artwork worth more money now that it's shredded and had a performance aspect and achieved notoriety? Or was it more valuable intact just because it was attached to a really famous street artist? So with that in mind, just because a group of collectors wants to pay a lot of money for an artwork at any given time, it's just like the stock market. The market ebbs and flows, highs and lows, just like a stock market. The record holding auction amount for an artwork is for a portrait of Christ by Leonardo da Vinci. It sold for $450.3 million. So with that, I want us to think about, as we are looking at art, why we are judging it, how are we judging it, because that's going to come into play here with these next 3 theories of art criticism. There are 3 basic theories. They can work by themselves, singularly, or they can work in conjunction with each other. Now, typically when we're talking art criticism and 3 theories, we are definitely in the realm of art history and art critics and art historians. And a lot of the writing about the artwork by noted individuals in the field of art history and art criticism and theory can lend credence to an artwork, meaning making it can add value to an artwork, or it can devalue it in some way. So while we are looking at these 3 basic theories, I'm giving you these because in part we will be writing about an artwork, and I want you to have a little bit of understanding of what it takes to evaluate one. So what is a formal theory of art? When we are talking about a formal theory of artwork, we are talking about looking at how a work is made. We're talking about parts of a composition coming together, organization being the most important factor. We're talking about the idea of innovation in style, above all, and comparing it to a work's contemporaries. So if we were to look at this artwork, what is its composition? What is its value and innovation compared to its contemporary? What are its organization? What is it organizing in terms of elements of art to create the composition? So this is obviously influenced by Cubism. Remember that flattening of planes all into one plane, but without the overlapping planes. This is like early Cubism with Braque and Picasso. But here, there you're using the elements of color and line and form to create a composition. And if you look closely at it, it looks like a landscape, if you will, like a mountain here in the center, a sun and the glow from the sun behind the mountain. Maybe this is the sunset and dusk is coming down over here. So the idea of using the principles and elements of art and design to create a composition, all those formal elements, and how does it compare to its contemporaries, in this instance, Cubism. The next theory would be contextual. What makes a contextual theory? Well, a contextual theory examines the environmental influence on a work of art, such as the economic system, the cultural values, the politics of the artist. So, and of society. So what else was going on at that time? So if we look at the Horn Players by Basquiat, when we are thinking of it in terms of what is happening and what is the artist, what is happening around the artist and what is he looking at and thinking about, this one is really about the jazz greats, if you will. You know, it's the bebop movement of jazz in the 40s, the cutoff ear, representing Charlie Parker being cut off in his prime, mirroring the idea of Van Gogh. Ornithology over here is the idea, or is a reference to a track recorded by Parker and Dizzy Gillespie. And so we have these ideas of music that Basquiat was influenced by. So the idea of contextual, what are the influences on the artist, whether it's other artists, music, society, politics, economics, cultural values, all of that pulls into the idea of contextual theory. And very lastly, in terms of the third theory of art criticism, it is the expressive theory. Who made it and who are they? We're looking for personal meanings, deep psychological insight, or human concern. A lot of times self-portraiture falls into this, like direct self-portraiture, like Frida Kahlo, or less direct, like Kandinsky's artwork we looked at earlier, where it is a self-portrait of the goings on in his head as he listens to music and his mood about that, without his likeness being in there. So in expressive theory, a lot of time can also be spent on the psychoanalysis of the artist and gender studies of the artist in terms of themselves and the community in which they inhabit, and society. If they have a network or group that they're working in, that falls under the idea of the gender studies and the psychoanalysis also. So here we are looking at the Pieta as an expressive theory of Titian. It was painted in his last year of life, and it's a somber reflection of mortality. I mean, it is, you know, literally here the representation of Christ coming off the cross and being on Mary's lap. And we have Titian having painted himself up here in, I believe it's him right here, as a self-portrait within a larger context. So these can all fall over each other too. If we were going to take the contextual theory of the Pieta, we would say it's an altarpiece for public viewing in a chapel, you know, kind of where it exists. And then it was also painted during a time of epidemic of plague, so lots of mortality and grief, and you can see that coming through in the darkness of the color, all of the subject matter itself. And if we were to look at it in terms of a formal theory, there's innovative brushwork, he understood his predecessor's methods and made his brushwork more painterly, so giving it a little more flair. And he tried some bold new compositional devices. This diagonal here, instead of having a hierarchy, he's creating asymmetry with the diagonal and balancing it over here with the light and statuary. So when we're writing about artwork, there are a few things outside of, formulating our theories about it, that we will, that we need to look at that help us come to an evaluative statement. We will also look at the handout called Diet and Tide a little more in depth. That handout breaks this down essentially into steps to be able to come to a conclusion about an artwork. But the short story is, first of all, when you're looking at an artwork, get the facts, get the artist's name, the title of the work, the date, the subject, the medium, the size, the location of the work, if all of that is available. So if we were to go back here and look at Basquiat's artwork, the title is Horn Players. Basquiat, Jean-Michel Basquiat, is the artist. Acrylic crayon and canvas is the media that he used to create it. And it was made in 1983. So when we are talking about when artwork is made, the date of the artwork, we are really talking about the year. We are not talking about month and day. Very rarely is that expressed in theories of criticism or even on the artwork itself. They usually just sign it with the year. And that's how it works in art history. And typically when we are looking at art on the slides, the artist's name is first, then the title, then the date. The subject is less obvious, and it's not usually in that grouping of words. It's usually in the artwork itself. The medium, meaning what is the media it was made from. The size sometimes is on there, not always. And the location of the artwork, what museum it lives in or where it lives, is typically on there also, but not always. After you've looked at all of that, it's time to start analyzing the artwork. So look at the parts of the artwork and how they fit together, the composition, the color, the formal elements and principles of design. And once you go from there, you can start assessing the work in its context and in its place in artist's overall output. How much is the formal elements expressed? Are they front and center? Are they in the background? What is the context of the work? What is its time and place it was made? What was happening around the artist? Where in whether it's in a series of works by the same artist that deal with the same subject matter, where is it in that series? Or if they don't work in a series, where does it fall in the totality of the portfolio of the artist? And then lastly, you can begin to evaluate. With all that information, you can come up with an evaluation. So in that evaluation, you do need to assess the quality or importance of it in relation to art criticism. So one of those three theories. Is it innovative? Does it affect your feelings, reflect the time period or the personality in which it was made or of the artist? Do you find it beautiful or challenging to the eye? All of that goes back to that value judgment, that subjectivity. Everyone's going to see something different in an artwork. Even if there are similarities that you do see, you may come to different conclusions, or you may even come to the same conclusion but find different elements of it beautiful than the other person. So when you are writing about an artwork or just even looking at an artwork, ask yourself questions. There's that handout of questions to ask yourself when looking at three-dimensional work. Well, just because it says it's for three-dimensional work, the majority of those questions also work for two-dimensional work. And so I would start looking at that too, and familiarizing yourself with that, so that when we start looking at artwork and I start asking you about artwork, you have a jumping off point and you're not just floundering and wondering where to begin. So when artwork goes out into the world, it lends itself sometimes to the idea of censorship, depending on who it may or may not offend, what the subject matter is, what the media is. The artwork I'm going to show you as an illustration of one that had been attempted to be censored has more to do, on the surface, it's about the subject matter. At heart, it has to deal with the dung and the cutouts. But when we look at it, I think it will be obvious as to why it may have come across as censored. And I'll talk more about it here in a minute. But what is censorship, first of all? It's the alteration or removal of a work of art from public view. So whether it's sculpture or painting or photography or even music gets censored, books get censored, all of those are works of art. They're just not considered visual works of art, right? And why are things censored? Well, the biggest one is religious and moral reasons, and political reasons are in there too. Another reason is that if those are the reasons people are using, the grounds people are using to object to a work of art, who decides what it is? So civil authorities decide that the artist's freedom takes a backseat to other important values, is what happens when a piece of work ends up censored. It means that civil authorities, meaning the courts really, decide that the artist's freedom takes a backseat to other important values held within society at that time. So it's been practiced throughout history. Popes at one time ordered the covering of the genitals in the Sistine Chapel because, Michelangelo painted all those murals, and the figures, for the most part, are nude. So with that being said, the history of the artwork I'm about to show you is from the 1990s, early 2000s, somewhere in there. And Rudy Giuliani, the mayor of New York City at the time, took incredible offense at it because it's a picture, a painting of the Virgin Mary, and she's black. Now, Rudy Giuliani grew up Catholic, very staunch Catholic. So here we have religious reasons, moral reasons, political reasons. This was a show at the Whitney called Sensation, and it was designed for shock value primarily, but it also pushed art in a way that art hadn't been pushed in a while. So Chrysophilia, before I get there, this is the Holy Virgin Mary. The media used is acrylic and oil paint, resin, paper collage, glitter, matte pens, and elephant dung on linen. Now, it was 1996 is when the artwork was made, and I think it was 97, 98 when the show happened. The paper cutouts are all these little pink blobs that look like lungs. Those actually are rear ends cut out from porn magazines and glued on. There is elephant dung painted within the image, and then the acrylic and glitter and all of that is there. Now, Chris O'Feely is a white man, but he was raised with missionary parents in Central Africa, I believe. And because they were missionary parents, you know, like faith was important and that's what they were there to preach. But he grew up around people of color, black skin tones. To him, the Virgin Mary was black. And that was his defense against Rudy Giuliani. He won, not Giuliani, but O'Feely won. And if you really think about it, you know, the stories in the Bibles, where those stories are set, people do have very dark skin for the most part. And so it might be a truer representation of the Virgin Mary than, say, Rudy Giuliani's version. But with that being said, the courts upheld O'Feely's freedom of speech. The Whitney declined the money that they were given from New York State, their revenue support, and went private because this show and the controversy of this image raised so much money that they created a foundation to pay all their operating expenses and everything. So this artwork itself, while a bit sensationalist, set up an art institution, a revered art institution, to continue its mission. So I want you to know that censorship happens across all media, all disciplines, all types of art, and it's not just art that gets censored. This just happens to be one of the pieces in more recent history in the art world that had been attempted to be censored. So lastly, I would like to talk about how do we know when an artwork is finished? How does an artist know that they are done with their painting, their sculpture, their print, their, multimedia piece? How do they know? Well, it's because the design seems inevitable. And if nothing else, I really want you to remember that the design seems inevitable, meaning that there's not anything they would rather do to it to make it better, and that every time they attempt to do something to it, it changes it in a way that affects it negatively. So they just stop because they're satisfied with what it is. So we're going to talk about design again when we get to, I believe it's the principles of art, but design is both the process of arranging objects and the product of that process. We in art use design in two different ways. It essentially has two different meanings. One is the process of arranging objects. How are you composing within that format? And then the product of that process, the finished product. So it's a good design, meaning it's a good composition, it works, it feels inevitable. That's what we mean. So while the artwork may feel inevitable as a finished work, it is never inevitable. It is one of the most considered, reworked ways of creating art. Like, rarely does an artist lay something down the first time and is completely happy with it and feels it's finished and walks away from it. Typically, the artist lays something down, adds to it, takes away from it, changes the process, changes the idea. Like, it's constant problem solving. Maybe you fixed one thing and all of a sudden, while that thing is fixed, something else is out of balance or out of whack. And so you constantly are changing and problem solving and figuring out and working at it until the composition feels balanced in all its formal aspects. In the way the elements are arranged, in the way that the principles have been used, in the way that it feels good, in a way, I guess is a way to describe it. In a way that it feels balanced. Like, if you change one thing, it's going to wreck it. So here are state images of Henri Matisse's working images to his final product called Large Reclining Nude. So what we have here is something that starts off fairly representational. We can see this is a figure laying, it looks like a bedroom. There's some flowers in the background. She's on a bed. And then it just keeps changing this way, this way, this way. Here we now have a grid and a flattening out. Like here, we've lost the corner definition, flattening out. Flowers are shifting over, more shift. We lose some detail, we get a lot of detail, and it keeps going on and on and on and on until we come with this. And it works. It feels balanced. Yeah, her head is small, but it's not so much about her head. It's about how everything works within this composition. The flowers now, to me, look like a roll of towels on a window ledge that she's in, like this tiled tub. But really, it is that bedroom again. And Henri Matisse was a contemporary of Picasso. They were friends and rivals. They both did a lot of figure painting. And they tried to use the figure in a variety of ways, all abstract. And so we come to the conclusion of a finished artwork.